Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I knew something had shifted the night I stopped pretending I didn't see the way she looked at him. It wasn't obvious, it wasn't reckless. It was quieter than that, a flicker in her eyes when he laughed, a pause in his voice when she walked into the room. The kind of spark you could dismiss if you wanted to. But I had been noticing it for weeks. And the more I noticed, the less I could ignore the heat curling low in my stomach every time the four of us sat across from each other pretending we were just friends. We had always been comfortable together. Dinners that stretched too long, wine glasses refilled without asking, conversations that blurred the line between innocent and intimate. She was effortless, magnetic in a way that drew attention without trying. My husband had always admired confidence and she wore it like silk against bare skin. I told myself it was harmless. That glances didn't mean anything. That lingering laughter wasn't a betrayal. But sometimes I would catch his hand brushing hers as they reached for the same glass, and neither of them would pull away quickly enough. And then there was her husband. He was quieter, observant. The kind of man who didn't compete for attention, he waited for it. At first I barely noticed him noticing me, but once I did, it was impossible to unsee. His gaze lingered just a second too long when I crossed my legs. His voice softened when he spoke directly to me. It wasn't aggressive or crude, it was careful, curious. That's how it started, with curiosity. The night everything tilted, she left early. A headache, she said, pressing her fingers to her temple. My husband offered to drive her home, concerned, attentive. I watched them leave together, something twisting inside my chest. Her husband stayed behind with me, saying he'd finish his drink first. The house felt different after they left. Too quiet. Too charged. We sat closer than usual on the couch, a safe distance that somehow felt dangerous. The air carried the faint scent of her perfume mixed with his cologne and the fading warmth of wine. Our knees brushed accidentally, or maybe not accidentally at all. Neither of us moved away. You've noticed it too, haven't you? He asked softly. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. My pulse thudded in my ears. The spark, the tension. The way the four of us had been orbiting something unnamed for weeks. Yes, I admitted. There was no anger in my voice. No jealousy, just truth. He leaned back slightly, studying me as though I were a question he'd been waiting to ask. And does it scare you? It should have. The idea that my husband might want someone else. The possibility that lines we had never crossed were suddenly visible. But what unsettled me most wasn't fear. It was the awareness of how alive I felt sitting there, suspended in that fragile space between loyalty and longing. Our conversation drifted into places we'd never allowed it to go before. Confessions about restlessness, about routine, about how sometimes desire isn't about replacing what you have but expanding it. His hand rested on the back of the couch behind me, not touching, just close enough for the warmth to register. Upstairs my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. She's feeling better. I'll be home soon. Soon. The word felt like a ticking clock. Her husband's fingers brushed a strand of hair from my shoulder. A gesture so gentle it could have been innocent. But it wasn't. Our eyes locked, and in that gaze was every unspoken thought we had been circling. Weeks of tension condensed into a single suspended moment. We both knew this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about the electricity that had been building quietly between all of us and the choice of whether to keep pretending it didn't exist. His thumb traced the air just shy of my collarbone, not quite touching. Waiting. Footsteps outside echoed faintly in the driveway. And neither of us moved. The headlights outside washed briefly across the ceiling, then disappeared. But the engine didn't turn off. Time stretched thin, fragile as glass. He didn't move his hand from the back of the couch. I didn't shift away. The space between his chest and my shoulder felt charged, like the seconds before a storm finally breaks. I could hear my own breathing, shallow, uneven, and I wondered if he could hear it too. They're still out there, I whispered. I know. His voice was steady but softer now. Closer. The kind of closeness that isn't measured in inches but in awareness. Every small movement felt magnified. The way his fingers flexed slightly against the fabric of the couch. The way my knee tilted toward his instead of away. This wasn't reckless. It wasn't desperate. It was deliberate. You don't seem angry, he said after a moment. Are you? I asked. He hesitated. A faint smile curved at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. No. That honesty was more intimate than anything else. Because anger would have been easier. Anger would have given us something to blame. But this was curiosity. Mutual, quiet, growing. The car door outside finally shut. My pulse jumped. He shifted slightly closer, not enough to cross a visible line, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his body along my arm. The fabric of my dress suddenly felt thinner, my skin more aware. I could smell the faint spice of his cologne, mixed with wine and something distinctly him. "I've tried not to look at you," he admitted. The words landed softly but carried weight. "Why?" I asked, even though I already knew. Because once I started it became difficult to stop. The confession made my throat tighten. I had noticed his glances. I had felt them like a brush of fingertips across my back. But hearing him say it calmly, openly, made it real in a way that sent warmth spiraling through me. "And yet you're still looking," I said. His gaze didn't waver. "So are you." Footsteps approached the front door. We both turned our heads instinctively, but neither of us shifted away. Not yet. That was the dangerous part. Not the closeness, not the conversation. It was the fact that neither of us seemed willing to break it. The door opened. Laughter floated in. Light, easy, familiar. My husband's voice, hers following closely behind. I swallowed. He lowered his arm from the back of the couch just as they stepped into the living room. The movement was subtle, but my skin missed the warmth instantly. "She's feeling much better," my husband said, glancing between us. "Sorry we took so long." Too long. Her eyes flickered toward me, then to her husband. Something unreadable passed between us. Not suspicion exactly, but awareness. As if she sensed the air had shifted. We all resumed our places. Polite, casual, controlled. But everything had changed. She sat beside my husband, closer than before. Their shoulders brushed as they laughed about something trivial. I watched his hand rest near her knee, not touching, just close enough to mirror the way her husband had sat with me minutes ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on any of us. Her husband leaned back in his chair now, composed, almost detached. But when our eyes met across the room, the intensity hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. We had crossed into something unspoken together, and that kind of shared secret lingers. Conversation flowed around us, but underneath it ran a quieter current. Every accidental brush felt intentional. Every glance lasted half a second longer than it should have. At one point she reached across the table for the wine, and my husband steadied the bottle with his hand over hers. Their fingers overlapped briefly, too briefly, but enough. I felt it not as jealousy but as awareness, as heat. Her husband noticed too. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened just slightly. But instead of looking at them, he looked at me, and held my gaze. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Another drink?" he asked me, standing slowly. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We moved into the kitchen together. Not rushed, not secretive, just natural enough to be plausible. The kitchen light was brighter, cooler. It broke the spell slightly, but not completely. He poured the wine carefully, his movements controlled. I leaned against the counter, watching the quiet precision in his hands. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer surprised me. He handed me the glass, his fingers brushing mine this time, not accidental, not lingering, just enough. The contact sent a pulse up my arm. "We could pretend none of this is happening," he said softly. "We have been." He finally looked at me. There was no hunger in his expression, no recklessness, just depth, a quiet pull that felt less like impulse and more like inevitability. "But pretending doesn't make it disappear," he added. Voices drifted in from the living room. Light, comfortable. Too comfortable. I stepped a fraction closer, not touching. Just closing the distance enough to feel the warmth radiating from him again. "What are we doing?" I whispered. His breath slowed, standing very close to a line. The tension hummed between us, alive, fragile, waiting. And neither of us stepped back. The kitchen felt smaller the longer we stood there, not physically. The marble counters, the pendant lights, the quiet hum of the refrigerator were all the same, but the space between us seemed to compress, charged with something neither of us dared to name. In the living room, laughter rose again. Familiar, comfortable, dangerous. He set his wine glass down on the counter behind me, his movements slow, deliberate. For a moment his hand hovered near my waist, not touching, just suspended there. The restraint in that almost contact felt heavier than any embrace could have. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe we're not angry because this was never about betrayal?" I swallowed. "Then what is it about?" His eyes traced my face as if searching for the answer there. "Honesty." The word landed deep, because honesty was the one thing we hadn't practiced. Not fully. Not about the glances. Not about the flicker of heat that sparked when our partners laughed a little too freely with each other. Not about the restless feeling that had settled into all of us like an unspoken agreement. I love him, I said suddenly. It came out sharper than I intended, as if I were defending something fragile. He didn't flinch. I know, and you love her. Yes. There it was. The wall. Solid, real. Built from years of shared history, inside jokes, anniversaries, quiet mornings. The kind of foundation you don't abandon lightly. Yet standing here inches apart, I felt something equally real building between us. Not instead of what we had at home but alongside it. And that terrified me more than anything. His fingers finally brushed my waist. Softly. A question, not a claim. My breath caught. The contact was so light it barely registered physically, but emotionally it roared. Every nerve in my body seemed to wake at once. You should go back in there, I whispered. He didn't move his hand. Do you want me to? The truth hovered between us. No, but want had become the most dangerous word in the room. Voices drifted closer, footsteps shifting in the living room. The fragile bubble around us trembled. He leaned in slightly, not enough to touch his forehead to mine, but enough that I could feel his breath near my cheek. The air thickened, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. For a suspended second I thought he might close the distance. And part of me, the reckless, aching part, wanted him to. But just as the space between our faces narrowed to something fragile and electric, he stopped. His hand fell from my waist. He stepped back. Not because he didn't feel it, because he did. The restraint hurt more than surrender would have. We're playing with something that doesn't come undone easily, he said, voice rougher now. I know. Silence stretched between us again, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything we were choosing not to do. She appeared in the doorway then, framed by warm light from the living room. Her expression was casual but her eyes were sharp. You two okay in here? She asked lightly, too lightly. Yes, he answered smoothly, reaching for his glass again. Just debating whether we need another bottle. Her gaze flickered between us. A flicker of understanding passed through her. Not accusation, not surprise. Awareness. Maybe we all do, she replied. When we returned to the living room, the atmosphere had shifted. Subtle but undeniable. My husband's arm rested along the back of the couch behind her now, mirroring the way his had rested behind me earlier. The symmetry was no longer accidental. I sat beside my husband, feeling the familiar weight of his presence, the comfort of his thigh against mine. He glanced at me with an easy smile, unaware or pretending to be. You okay? He asked softly. Yes, I answered, but the word felt layered, because I was okay, and unsettled, and alive in a way I hadn't expected. Across from us, her husband met my gaze again. The restraint in his expression matched my own. We had stepped back, but the space between us still hummed. At one point our fingers grazed when all four of us reached for the same bowl on the table. The contact was fleeting, accidental enough to dismiss. But neither of us did. Instead we both pulled away a second too slowly. Conversation turned softer as the night deepened. The wine ran low, the lights dimmed further. There was a moment, brief but powerful, when all four of us fell into a silence that felt almost sacred. As if we all understood something had shifted, not broken, shifted. When they finally stood to leave, hugs felt different. Closer. Lingering just slightly longer than before. Her arms wrapped around my husband, her cheek brushing his. My husband's hand rested at her back in a way that was almost protective. Then it was his turn. He stepped toward me and for a split second we hesitated. Too aware. His embrace was warm, familiar in a way it shouldn't have been. His hand settled at my lower back, respectful, measured but firm enough to send heat spiraling through me again. Good night, he murmured near my ear. It sounded like a promise. Or a warning. When the door closed behind them, the house felt impossibly quiet. My husband wrapped his arm around my shoulders from behind, pulling me close. That was fun, he said. Fun. I leaned into him, heart still racing from something he didn't see. Yeah, I replied softly. But as I stared at the closed door, I knew this wasn't over. We had stepped back tonight, not away, and that difference was everything. The house didn't feel the same after that night. Not broken, not guilty. Just charged, like every room held a memory of something that hadn't happened but almost did. Days passed. Messages were shorter in the group chat. Plans postponed. An unspoken pause settled between the four of us, fragile and deliberate. Until the night he showed up alone. My husband had been called away for work, a last-minute overnight trip. She was visiting her sister. Coincidence maybe, or maybe the universe had grown tired of subtlety. When the doorbell rang, my pulse already knew who it would be. I opened it slowly. He stood there with that same composed expression, hands tucked into his coat pockets, but his eyes gave him away. They searched my face like they'd been waiting days to do it without witnesses. "I was nearby," he said. A simple sentence. A complicated truth. I stepped aside to let him in. The air between us shifted instantly, not rushed, not reckless. Just inevitable. The living room lamp cast a soft amber glow across the walls, turning shadows into something intimate. No wine tonight, no background laughter, no buffer. Just us. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly, though I didn't move away. "I know." But he didn't leave. We stood facing each other near the couch, close enough that I could see the faint tension in his jaw, the way his breathing wasn't as steady as he pretended. "Why does it feel like we've been holding our breath for weeks?" I asked. "Because we have." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of almost every glance, every touch that hovered and withdrew. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch, just enough that the space between our bodies felt thin as silk. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said, voice low. "Neither do I." And yet, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The truth lingered in the room like heat before rain. I could feel it now, not just attraction but recognition. The kind that feels less like a choice and more like gravity. My heart pounded so loudly it felt visible. His gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then lifted back to my eyes, searching for resistance. There wasn't enough of it. "I've tried to tell myself this is just curiosity," he admitted, "that it would pass." "And has it?" I whispered. His hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, as if giving me time to stop him. It hovered near my cheek, close enough that warmth brushed my skin. "No," he said. The confession broke something open. My breath trembled as his fingertips finally touched my face, barely there, tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that felt more intimate than anything reckless ever could. It wasn't possession, it was reverence. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. I should have stepped back. Instead, I leaned in, just slightly. His thumb brushed near the corner of my mouth, slow and uncertain. A question. My hands rose instinctively, resting lightly against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat, steady but strong, matching the rhythm racing through me. "We can still stop," I said, though my voice had softened into something almost fragile. "Tell me to." The space between our faces disappeared inch by inch. My thoughts blurred, loyalty, desire, fear, longing, all tangling together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. His forehead rested gently against mine. No kiss, not yet, just breath, shared in the smallest space imaginable. "I think about you," he confessed, the words barely louder than air. "More than I should." The honesty in it stole whatever strength I had left. "I know," I whispered. My fingers tightened slightly against his shirt. Not pulling, not pushing, just anchoring. His hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, cradling it softly. The gesture was protective, careful, and unbearably intimate. For a suspended second, everything aligned. The weeks of tension, the glances, the restraint. It all led here. His lips hovered a breath away from mine. Time fractured. I could feel the warmth of him, the nearness, the inevitability building like a wave ready to break. And then a car door slammed outside. The sound cut through the silence like lightning. We froze. Reality rushed back in, sharp and unforgiving. His hand slipped from my neck. My palms flattened against his chest as if suddenly aware of how close we stood. We stepped back at the same time. The distance felt colder than before. Headlights swept briefly across the window. Neither of us spoke. Because we both knew if we hadn't been interrupted we wouldn't have stopped. And that truth was louder than any confession. Rain arrived without warning. It began as a soft tapping against the windows, hesitant, almost polite, before deepening into a steady rhythm that wrapped the house in a cocoon of sound. The sky outside blurred into silver streaks, and the world beyond the glass disappeared. It felt like permission. He hadn't planned to come over, neither had I asked him to. But when the storm cut the power briefly across the neighborhood and the lights flickered back on, his message came through. "You okay?" I stared at it longer than I should have. "Yes," I replied. A pause. "Can I see you?" The rain answered before I did. When I opened the door he looked different. Not composed. Not measured. Just honest. Damp hair from the rain. Jacket darkened at the shoulders. Eyes carrying something that had finally grown tired of restraint. "I won't stay long," he said. We both knew that wasn't true. The house felt dimmer tonight. Only a few lamps glowed, casting warm pools of light that turned the room intimate, almost dreamlike. The storm outside softened every edge, muting the world until all that existed was the space between us. For a moment we simply stood there. No careful distance this time. No rehearsed control. The weeks of almost had thinned our defenses to nothing. "You should go," I whispered, but it lacked conviction. He stepped closer instead. Rain traced the windows behind him, streaking silver across the dark. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, like a warning we were choosing not to hear. "I don't want to almost anymore," he said quietly. The words settled into me like heat. Neither did I. I reached for him first. Not urgently, not desperately, just truthfully. My fingers slid into his, cool from the rain. He exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for days. The contact felt electric, not because it was new, but because it was finally allowed. His other hand found my waist, firm and certain now. Not hovering, not asking, choosing. The air between us dissolved. I could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, the warmth radiating through fabric and skin alike. The storm outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I know," but neither of us stepped back. His hand moved slowly along my back, not rushed, not claiming, just learning the shape of me the way memory learns a favorite song. My palms pressed against his chest, feeling the strength beneath, the quiet tremor that mirrored my own. There was no more pretending. When he leaned in, it wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. Our foreheads touched first, like before, but this time we didn't stop there. Her breath melted into his. The kiss was not hungry. It was deep, careful at first, as though both of us feared the fragility of the moment. But when I tilted closer, when his fingers tightened slightly at my waist, something inside us gave way. The world narrowed to warmth and rain, to the slow synchronized rhythm of two hearts finally aligning. His hand slid to the curve of my neck, fingertips threading gently into my hair. My arms circled him, drawing him closer until there was no more space left to negotiate. Their bodies spoke the words they couldn't say. Every restrained glance, every interrupted moment, every whisper of not yet dissolved into the simple honesty of skin against skin. Not frantic, not reckless, just undeniably real. The lamp beside us cast a golden halo across the room, illuminating the curve of his jaw, the softness in his eyes when he pulled back just enough to look at me. There was no triumph there, no victory, only vulnerability. "Tell me to stop," he breathed again. Softer this time. I answered by drawing him back. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the roof like applause. Thunder cracked closer now, but the storm inside the room was quieter, steadier, less chaotic. We moved together slowly, instinctively, guided not by urgency but by recognition. The couch met the back of my knees. His hand steadied me as we sank into its softness. The world felt suspended, as if time itself had paused to let this happen. His lips traced along my cheek, my temple, reverent and unhurried. My fingers curled into his shirt, anchoring us both in something that felt less like desire and more like surrender. Not surrender to each other. Surrender to truth. The kind you can only avoid for so long before it demands to be felt. The storm began to soften eventually, rain easing into a gentle hush. The room glowed in warm amber light, shadows dancing softly across the walls. We stayed there, wrapped in each other, breathing the same air. No more distance. No more almost. Just the quiet aftermath of a line finally crossed, not in recklessness but in longing that had grown too powerful to deny. And somewhere beneath the fading thunder we both understood, there would be no pretending after this. Morning arrived too gently. Soft light filtered through the curtains, pale and honest, illuminating the quiet room with a kind of mercy neither of us deserved. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world outside washed clean. The air felt lighter. Inside it was heavier. I woke before he did. For a moment I didn't move. His arm rested loosely around me, his breathing slow and even, face softened by sleep. In the fragile calm of morning he looked younger, less conflicted, less guarded. My chest tightened. What had felt inevitable in the glow of lamplight now felt undeniable in daylight. I slipped carefully from beneath his arm and sat at the edge of the couch. The room carried the faint scent of rain and warmth. Echoes of what we had shared. It wasn't the memory of touch that overwhelmed me. It was the memory of choice. We hadn't been reckless. We hadn't been lost in impulse. We had chosen. He stirred behind me. "You're awake." His voice was rough with sleep and something else. "Yes." Silence stretched, not uncomfortable but uncertain. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair, eyes adjusting to the light. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The weight of what had happened hovered between us, Not shame, not regret, but awareness. Do you regret it? He asked finally. The question landed softly but carried everything. I searched myself honestly. No, I said. The truth surprised me. He studied my face carefully, as if measuring the steadiness of that answer. Neither do I. And that was the complicated part. Guilt existed. Of course it did. It lived in the quiet corners of the room, in the knowledge of vows made years ago. But it wasn't the sharp, suffocating guilt I expected. It was quieter, sadder. Because what we had felt wasn't careless. It was real. Was it love? I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window instead, where sunlight touched the glass in soft gold. I don't know, he admitted, but it wasn't escape that mattered. Escape would have been easier to dismiss. A moment of weakness, a storm-induced mistake. But this had grown slowly, deliberately over weeks of glances and restraint. It had roots. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound shattered the fragile calm. We both looked at it. Her name lit up the screen. My breath stalled. He saw it too. I picked up the phone slowly, hands steadier than I felt. Can we talk today? The message read. My heart pounded. Another message appeared seconds later. I think we all need to. I lifted my eyes to him. She knows? I whispered. He didn't look surprised. I think she's known longer than we thought. The realization settled over me like cold water. Had she seen it in the glances, felt it in the air? Had all four of us been circling this without admitting it? My phone buzzed again. This time it was my husband. Miss you. Coming home early. The room seemed to tilt. Everything we had suspended in lamplight now demanded gravity. He stood slowly, crossing the space between us. There was no panic in his movements, no scrambling for excuses, just quiet understanding. We can't pretend this didn't happen, he said. I don't want to. The honesty of that felt almost defiant. He reached for my hands, holding them gently between his. The contact felt different now, deeper, less electric, more grounded. This isn't the end of something, he said. It's the beginning of truth. The word felt both terrifying and freeing. Outside, a car passed down the street, tires hissing softly against wet pavement. Life continuing, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside these walls. I don't want to lose him, I said, and I don't want to lose her. The vulnerability in his voice mirrored my own, but I don't want to lose this either. Neither did I. Footsteps sounded faintly on the porch outside. My heart leapt. Too soon. A knock followed, firm, unmistakable. We both froze. Another knock. He squeezed my hands once, steady and grounding. This was never going to stay in the dark, he said quietly. I moved toward the door slowly, pulse roaring in my ears. When I opened it, she stood there composed, eyes searching, rain-washed sunlight catching in her hair. Behind her, my husband stepped up onto the porch. All four of us finally standing in the same daylight. No more shadows. No more almost. Just the truth, waiting to be spoken. And somehow, despite the fear tightening in my chest, I felt something else too. Relief. The four of us stood in the doorway like a truth finally given shape. No accusations, no raised voices, just breath shared in daylight that felt too honest to hide behind. She was the first to step inside. Her gaze moved from me to him, then to my husband. There was no shock in her expression, only confirmation, as if the final piece of something she had sensed for weeks had quietly clicked into place. We should sit, she said gently. We gathered in the living room, the same room where laughter once floated easily, where glances once hid beneath politeness. Now the air was still, transparent. My husband looked at me differently, not unaware, not blind, aware. I think we've all felt it, he said slowly, his voice steady but soft. For a while. No one denied it. Her husband, the man whose hand had once hovered and then finally held, didn't reach for me now. He sat across from me instead, hands clasped, posture grounded. What happened last night? She asked, not sharply, not accusingly, just truthfully. I could have softened it, could have blurred it into something less confronting. But the story had already cost too much silence. We stopped pretending, I said. The words hung in the room, fragile but clean. My husband closed his eyes briefly, not in anger, in processing. When he opened them, they were damp but calm. Did it mean something? He asked. It would have been easier to say no, but easy had never been honest. Yes. Not a declaration of forever, not a promise of abandonment. Just yes. She inhaled slowly. Her hand found her husband's, fingers weaving together instinctively. I watched that gesture, the familiarity, the years inside it, and felt the quiet ache of what was at risk. Then something unexpected happened. She looked at me, not with resentment but with recognition. "I don't think this was about losing each other," she said carefully. "I think it was about finding parts of ourselves we've ignored." Silence followed, but it was softer now. My husband shifted closer to me, his knee brushing mine. The contact felt grounding, a reminder of shared history, of promises that weren't fragile simply because they'd been tested. "We've all been restless," he admitted, pretending we weren't. The confession loosened something tight in my chest. No one stormed out. No one shattered. Instead, we talked. About loneliness that exists even inside love. About how comfort can sometimes quiet desire instead of nourishing it. About how attraction doesn't automatically mean betrayal, but secrecy does. By the time afternoon light warmed the room, something had shifted again. Not back to what it was. Forward. Her husband stood first. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and stopped in front of me. For a second I thought he might reach for me. He didn't. Instead, he stepped aside, and my husband moved into that space. He took my face gently in his hands, the same way someone might hold something breakable and precious. His lips rested against my forehead, warm and steady. "I choose you," he whispered, not out of fear, out of clarity. Tears blurred my vision, not from sorrow but from relief, because choice felt stronger than impulse, deeper than curiosity. Across the room she leaned into her husband, his arm wrapping around her waist in quiet solidarity. Their bond hadn't disappeared, it had simply been forced into the light. "We can't undo what happened," she said softly. "But we don't have to let it destroy us." And somehow it didn't. The four of us didn't walk away strangers. We walked away honest. In the weeks that followed, boundaries were rebuilt. Not rigid, not suffocating, but conscious. Conversations became braver. Touch became intentional again, no longer taken for granted. And sometimes, rarely, when our eyes met across a room, there was still that flicker. But it no longer felt like something unfinished. It felt like a chapter we had read fully and closed with care. On a quiet evening months later, my husband and I sat on the same couch where everything had nearly unraveled. The rain tapped gently against the windows again, softer this time. He brushed a strand of hair from my face and smiled. Not possessive, not threatened. Peaceful. I rested my forehead against his. Not because there was no temptation left in the world, but because we had chosen something steadier. The spark had forced us to look at ourselves. The storm had forced us to speak, and love, real grounded love, had chosen to stay. Some connections burn bright and disappear like lightning, others warm slowly like embers that refuse to fade. We chose the embers.